Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode. I want to speak about a concept which I would like the audience to feel free to share any commentary they have. The title of tonight's episode is Revelatory Episodes. And inner dialogues. And so I decided for this episode to kind of make it more directed towards my personal experience. I feel I've had certain experiences with in some sense, communications. I've, in some sense, in the playfulness of my subtler planes of abstraction, communicated with the invisible other. That means I have noticed certain moments where archetypes entered my mind that were left dormant. It's as if they weren't from the memories of this sort of state of being, but another. This world communication, I have kind of, in some sense, searched for ultimate archetypes for human beings, and in some sense, I've come to two. And in some sense, one of them is called the pilots of consciousness. The other is in some sense called advanced communicators. And both ideas have an interesting relationship. The advanced communicator is pretty much any human being who has realized they're an advanced communication of their universal sector. Their intelligence is not just the intelligence of their free individual abstraction. So the advanced communicator is a being who is being inspired to see the edge of the evolution of human communication and the intention of communication. Communication is not per se just a human activity, it is a transmission. It's a sort of creating a bridge between worlds. In Let me tell you how it kind of started for me. At a young age, I was introduced to certain metaphysical ideas, but they weren't real. Pretty much the idea of a sort of spiritual existence wasn't new. By the age of 15, I remember I was in a certain state where I was contemplating, okay, I could see the possibility of some underlying soul, but then what is this mind that still remains unknown? And so I remember my attention went onto the mind after, in some sense, I was kind of satisfied with a sort of metaphysical landscape. Now, what that means is that anything you're introduced to early on in your life, you attain maturity over. What that means is any design that your intelligence has recognized so far, a part of it is to recognize the design quickly. The other part of it is the duration and time, that how certain ideas and abilities they emerge through time, through a sort of alignment of physical capability and kind of a non-physical attention. So I got to paint this picture properly because in 2019, people can be very sensitive to language. The more sensitive to language you are, the more ideologically you're driven. The more ideologically driven, the less you see of the living world. These inner dialogues are, the ancient Greeks used to call it the logos. The logos was a inner guiding voice that directed the intelligent being to some ultimate resolution. For example, Socrates, a man who is very noted, very kind of shared, kind of very important to Western thought at least. Socrates, did you know this dude had a relationship with this invisible kind of intelligence in his moment he called the inner oracle? And this inner oracle would tell him if he should carry on with the moment or not, as if he was such an old soul. He had certain uh, guides, like as if like he had a tourist guide to his destiny. Many people, many philosophers, they've had a sort of unknown inspiration guiding them, and it's not just philosophers, it's many human beings. We do require inspiration. A lot of people looking for love, looking for power, looking for glory, they, in some sense, they require attention. It's kind of like the attention of human beings requires to water each other into greater growth. And what I mean by that is like, there's a quote from what's his name, Juvenal, and he says, all wish to possess knowledge, but few, comparatively speaking, are willing to pay the price. And that is true because the price of knowledge is the occupation of the space of the mind, literally, as if the more stuff you actually know, like the more symbols you know, the more furniture there is in your room. So personally, for me, um, I've been aware of a sort of invisible other, but it never was personalized. It never had a shape. I kind of remember like there were people around me who some people felt they were clairvoyant, they could see things in the room. I remember some people could feel, in some sense, they are hearing, they could, it's as if their ears were open to the invisible dimensions, and some their eyes, and some it was like a sensory oriented thing. But I remember fundamentally for me, there would be moments where I would enter a room and there would be an emotional kind of turbulence, as if there was a sort of energetic residue in the room of what had happened before. And you can totally see because if you want to see a person's body, you gotta just look them in the eyes, you know? If you want to look into a person's mind, you gotta look into their words. You gotta literally see how this intelligence that they are is aiming to communicate itself. So, anyways, how would I say it? Like, I opened up to writing. I was raking leaves in my backyard, and I remember hearing certain lines of poetry behind my eyes. And these lines of poetry made me tear up. So I was like, this dude on a sunny day raking leaves and tears coming out of his eyes. Like, if you watched me from a distance, you'd be like, this man is getting so emotional over raking the leaves. Yeah. It's a level of freedom that allows life. to have more color because we're creatures that are defined by the animate aspect of our intelligence. Literally, when we move, that's when we say we can be intelligent. So we say that a lot of language and communication from the unknown or otherwise is pretty much movement. So fundamentally, whether we say we understand or don't understand, phenomena is moving. Eventually, there will be a kind of resolution required of a commonality, kind of like a Venn diagram where the middle area is shared between both turfs. It's like the truce between the hemispheres of the brain is found in the frontal lobe. There is something that watches the chaos and order dance infinitely, and that moment, that moment is an ultimate moment. When you bow at life because you see it has bowed to the next whim of your attention. So, me personally, I've had various moments. I've had certain, it's all about data processing. How are you processing the data? If you want to fit into the modern mainstream, you just have to find allegiance to materiality. What that means is because you see the objective more than the subjective, you think everything is objective. But there are certain people who they look at certain words and it opens dimensions in their eyes. It's kind of like we don't realize it, but it's not just that the world is happening outside of our eyes. It is happening internally. So you can say Carl Jung has this quote where he says, unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will dictate your life and call it fate. So, pretty much, unless you pull the strings of your intuition, you will, in some sense, not know whether something is in conscious validity or not. Human intelligence and the observable universe is like literally imagine holding a flashlight at night at some part of a forest, and only everything in that light is being accepted to be the only reality. That is the issue. That is the issue with our mainstream. We think we're advanced, but it doesn't look like it. So, this kind of fascination to make unknown intelligence known intellectually, it has always been there. It's kind of like all of life is a reaction to a moving image. This moving image is the changing cosmos. And to be honest, because the world is changing, so is our points of reference. What if I told you what you think you are as a being? Right now, what you see about it is maybe like 12% of what you actually are. It happened through first me noticing my thoughts moving faster than my normal thinking. So I had an experience where first data oriented. It's as if before you think you communicated to something, what was the communication? So you look at the nature. And I remember I went through a phase where I didn't know if I could trust a sort of valid implications of my imagination in reality. And not that I didn't know, it was like it's very obvious that since my childhood, I've kind of been watching language from a distance. I know. But I'm telling you, it's one of those things where when you trust the world, that's when things can happen. It's as if any being who doesn't trust the moment they're in, that your moment is not stable enough for any desire or intention or vision to come about. So you require to have a stability. You have to find a moment you can trust what happens, and then, in some sense, flow consciously or experience tunnel that way. Tunnel your experiences that way. So it began with writing. So I guess the evolution of it would be first, it was I remember I would have moments where I would just kind of intentionally wake up early in the morning and just turn on like the kind of this recorder and just speak to it. And I remember I reached a point where you can actually go in the driver's seat of the main function. I don't know how to say it. It's kind of like you become observant that you're being active, and it's like you become an audience member of your own voice. I don't know how to say it. But when you do that, you're kind of like not what's in the space, you're the space. So right now, you in whatever room you are, you're experiencing you're in the room and there's all this space around you, right? So I'm saying in that state, it was like you were the space and we were aware of what was in the room. It was a kind of switching. You were sitting in the, it's like I was sitting in the chair of my unconscious and subconsciously observing how my conscious phenomena was just a series of programs. And when these series of programs behind your eyes are sequenced in a certain way, they lead to certain results. So it's kind of like, I forget the concept. It was kind of like giga. I don't know what it was, but it was like data in, data out. So what you put in it, you get out of it. You see, so eventually the mystic will find, the person whose mind is mystically oriented, that there's a sort of self reflective quality to the value of imagination. Okay, so you see that your thoughts are kind of being put there at the same time. The only way to see it, how can I say it? It's like there is required a sort of renunciation. This renunciation is just an awareness of a space between the noise in the moment and the silence. Some people have trouble with silence. Silence to them is the death of their mind. Some people, they have trouble with the lack of movement. For them, that is the death of their body. That means the freedom to move in a world and the freedom for your mind to be of a world are the most crucial freedoms. So I've had many moments where I can say my attention has approached itself differently through my physical existence. So it's like altered states. Like, at the end of the day, you're super tired, so you're more agreeable. It's like a tired person gives you a quicker answer than someone else. For me, it's all just about from a conscious point going to an unconscious, and then from an unconscious point going to the conscious. I am telling you everything I have heard about metaphysics is something where it is not new. What can I tell you? It's as if there's more dimensions to our world, but we're a civilization only oriented to one, and that is where the problem begins. Because we don't realize the space of reality is different, even though we're all on the same planet, but how this planet comes across to us and how we see people and what they are, it has to do, of course, with our impressions. So, kind of like what Mr. Within is saying, is anybody you see outside throughout the day, you don't know them. You don't have their eyes to know what they see, what they know. This is why respect was crucial in ancient civilizations because it was a respect among masters. That means, what if I told you there were 8 billion geniuses on this rock in the middle of nowhere? Because genius means innovation, and because we're such a young species, everybody, it's so much unknown is left to kind of explore. There is a relationship with intuition, and I've always found it kind of to be the next modern challenge to how to define the exact relationship with the unknown. If I give you a story about it, you're either going to worship the story or fear the story. You see, you're going to either accept or deny. So it's not story oriented. This is why I say we can't kind of come to truth with thought and language. We can say language is a technology that stores truth and allows us to pass truth around, but we can't say it is truth because there are no truths in a changing world. What truth do you want to share? It's like the guy's yesterday's truth. Could it be today's lie? You know, could today's lie be the future's truth? Who knows? Who knows? There's too much movement. The cosmos is too big to have firm conclusions about. We just the best thing is we just have fun, build tools, and we just go forth. You know. So, anyways, some people call this in the New Age community. They call it channeling, and I find that term to be unnecessary. I find that any metaphor for the mind, the best is a natural metaphor. And so I've kind of wondered if I was to explain this to people how I would do it. And I would say, if you want to hear Mr. Within's story, like my personal story on this, you got to acknowledge it will never die and it is endless and eternal and limitless. Not because these words are being put as a mask upon it, but it is there. I don't know how to tell you, but um, we never die if we watch ourselves dying. Do you see what I mean? It's like, how can I tell you? You may die, but what was looking out through you throughout the lifetime does not. You know? So, to be honest, manifestation is a playground. You know, sometimes I've written a sentence and then kissed my own hand. What I mean by that is that I have kind of noticed that the value in life is, to be honest, how much we can see of this picture. So you can say the story of humanity is pretty much 8 billion people in an art gallery looking at the same painting. And some people, they don't see any meaning to the painting. They don't like it. They say life is too cruel. How can I like cruelty? And in some sense, they have a point. But we see that every person that stares upon this artwork, based on how much they're being true to themselves, their destiny gets carved. So, I remember in 2010 to 11, I don't know exactly. I don't think it was the 11. I think 2000, like 12 to 13. I remember I went on this point where I started writing these books. And I don't know how to tell you, but it's like what really dictates knowledge is vision. That's it. Vision is power, nothing else. Everything else is lacking vision. Do you see what I mean? And vision ultimately is how much of the painting of this life do you see and how much do you care for why it is here? Because if I don't care for anything, then I don't care for the universe. I don't care for matter. But we have to care for matter because evolutionary wise, we are at an important position, even though people don't talk to animals, but we have to care for them. We have to care for them because that is what the purpose of the superior mind, to just watch the inferior. Do you see? But eventually, regardless of if you're looking at life like a god or like a man, this balance between sky and earth, That means when fear comes, the presence I become my presence becomes like the sky. I become the unknown instantly, you know? But when there is knowledge approaching, that's when you also can extend your conscious attention to being an identifiable form, moving with the rhythms of a sort of cultural or social program. All of these are possible. But what I'm saying is, it's like, here's the situation: 8 billion people on this planet. They all have minds, they have brains, and these brains are, in some sense, projecting a sort of conscious mind with free will. So, what it is that it's the data that's put in front of the eyes of children, and it is the technologies they get access to. And what it means is that children like to climb levels of experience. When you get older, you want to stay at a certain level and kind of settle down. And in some sense, I felt the divine logos, the divine will, was kind of communicating to me was that reality was in multiple rooms, and that in this current moment, there is an objective physical room you're in, like right now I'm inside the physical room, but there is also various subjective rooms that come and go over this, as if a subtler dimension where the value of the phenomena in the room is changing quicker. Importance is the only way energy can be honest. What it is the problem is people are trying to find truth, or they think they should have it from the beginning. Truth is something you create. It was never inside a book, truth. It was never inside language. Language was a dream in the world of man. There's so many unknown factors to human intelligence that Mr. Within can say that it's like our species doesn't know anything yet. It's like that moment in Game of Thrones where it was like, Jon Snow, you know nothing, Jon Snow. It's like literally the cosmos is looking at planet Earth and it's like, you know nothing, rock. How have you opened your eyes to the world you see? So these inner dialogues took me to a sort of unique state where I was realizing that the mind was an opportunity for known limits to communicate with unknown boundaries. So what that means is I realize it doesn't matter where you get the image from, whether you dream something and that becomes an influential thought, or whether you see something, or whether you visualize something, whatever it is, when the idea, when the design comes into consciousness, then there comes the emergence of activity. So you can say you're this endless energetic source when you're awake, and this endless energetic source is being directed by what? By attention. Attention is the human attention is a pillar of civilization that must be protected. I've written this in my writing. Kind of like one of my magnum opus kind of works is the pillars of civilization. I'm gonna just It's like one of on my to-do list of completing that. And the pillars of civilization is this idea I have that there are these certain values, literally like stone columns that every generation comes and makes taller and taller, and it's endlessly reaching the sky. These pillars of civilization are these endless columns of various generations respecting the foundation of how civilization has come to be what it is. You see, it's so easy when you deny people from the curiosity to know what they are. That means they have been bogged down in the acceptance of a locality. Literally, imagine there's some guy back in the day. He has a bunch of artwork in his back, and he sells people artwork. And anybody who buys his artwork stares at this artwork forever until they die. And it's like this kind of like playful notion, kind of messed up playful notion, where in some sense the idea can influence you. Literally, if I said tomatoes were gifts from the gods, imagine all the people, whenever they saw a tomato, they bowed down in respect to the gods. It's like we can totally go on with that stream of language, that flashlight hitting that part of the forest. But when we realize the presence of the unknown, you see what makes warriors great is not how they defeat their opponents, but how clearly they could acknowledge the greatness. This is why you see in great, not just fighting movies and martial art movies, but great martial art masters, those who were certain of their ability and that they knew they would win by skill. They, in some sense, when their opponent, like for example, the opponents, they're both equally skill matched, and suddenly one of them trips and his sword falls out of his hand, the other doesn't kill him instantly. He lets him pick up his sword because there is a certain level of greatness activated for the possibility. That means it's like that's the world you want to see, not that people you turn on the TV and see people are suffering. You don't want to turn on the news and see people are like, oh shit, the world's, everybody else is suffering. You turn on the TV and you see the whole species is sufficiently advancing, and if you have taken a misstep, you in some sense have to get it back up. You see, it's a sort of command. So I'm telling you, all these archetypes of a sort of invisible other communicating with a conscious self eventually transformed in an ultimate value the mind has acknowledged as the world. So I'm saying, regardless of whatever dialogue or communication occurs, that one even says it, you can get say supernatural in quotations, regardless, it all comes down to a principle, universal value. Literally, as you as a creature opened your eyes, you had to value something more than something else in order for there to be a spectrum of duality. Do you see? It's very fascinating when we look at people's lives. It's like not only their DNA is unique, not only their eyes are unique, nobody can look through their eyes. And so at the same time, and their free will's decisions is unique. So it's like three kind of unknown dimensions intersecting. Okay, where your genetics is one aspect of it, where your limitations arise from, and then there is on some level the content and how much the free will has explored the living world. And then there is, in some sense, how much the laws of the universe move you. So, in some sense, I can sit here and say this is that and that is this, but only the strong can watch the full truth. And strength only arises when there is value enough. This is the strange world we find in ourselves in. Unless the proper motivation is given, greatness is not attempted. Shakespeare is known to say this quote that some people are born great. You can imagine like children of billionaires. Some people are born great. Some people achieve greatness. You can think of, in some sense, the businessman, the father of the main billionaire. And then Shakespeare says, and some people have greatness thrust upon them. This is, for example, the poor kid on the street who, based on the unique circumstances of life, they accumulated a position where it was important for their mind to be there. You see, everybody can imagine a pile of green pieces of paper on their desk, but in some sense, reality its value is so in how attention stands that, to be honest, love can only emerge when you want nothing from the world, and the two living natural beings can be there. You see, the kind of stepping from the artificial into the real. And the artificial is self inspired. When you think you are correct, that means you're paying attention more to the inner workings of your intelligence rather than what is actually happening outside. This is why I say there's something called ideological possession. or ideological enslavement. And so I'm saying that I was kind of blessed because this kind of invisible other kind of communication, the first thing, aside from the rooms thing, was that it told me not to see a face. It's as if imagine you hearing an invisible voice and you're like, "Is that you, God?" And the voice says, "No, I have no face. Don't even create me. Don't even give me a personality. Just hear the ideology." So I'm telling you, the way I attained the kind of that first relationship with the invisible unknown was actually concept oriented. It's as if I didn't have to change my truths to see something that was beyond my truths. Do you see? It was as if that the edge of what was real for me was shifting in accordance to how the data, literally, if your brain's an antenna, what it picked up in that moment. And so that is the kind of importance. Now, in the side section, in the subtitle, I've written that we said, like one of those Christian mystics, like that would put a skull on their table, like one of those dudes, you know. They would put a skull on their table so they would contemplate the meaning of life. And Meister Eckhart says the same eyes I see God are the same eyes God sees me. And that was a crucial statement. That meant that a creature between the individual and collective dimension has realized the individual and collective dimension are codependent. The moment you think you're alone, you want to be with others. The moment you're with others too much, you want to be alone. So in some sense, it's a relationship of psychology with its environment and its inner environment. The inner environment is the values you bring to the moment. The outer environment is certain values that are brought to, in some sense, are brought to you. For me, when I saw people pray, I'm like, what are these people doing? And I realized they are trying. They are honestly trying. And in the honesty of attempting something, you get the honest feedback, regardless if it's what you're looking for or not. The best kind of friend was the one that was a clear mirror, not a smudge on the truth. So this relationship with the inner dialogue kind of thing, it was like I felt there were certain beings. Like at some point I had this impression where I felt literally there could be like I had this impression space had a soul as well. It's kind of strange what I'm saying, but like because I had that impression, I felt that our personalities, when you look closely, like under the microscope, they are a sort of coagulation or of various snapshots of how the mind attempted to be the moment. Okay, and so all of these are kind of echoing in one moment. Like right now, as I'm speaking, there's so many thoughts orbiting around you. Literally imagine like there were orbit lines around you and thoughts were orbiting. Okay, and so what I'm saying by that is that the inner space is not empty if it is observed. It's as if like the guy went to heaven and God was there and he's like, "All right, God, I made it to heaven. Now tell me, why did you do all this? Why did you let Adam make his mistake when you created it?" And it's as if God looked at man in that moment and was like, "Because if you hadn't made a mistake, what was the point of existence?" And that's when the man understood, wherever you are, this is it. This world we see right now is it. We can attempt to escape into our inner realities, but I'm telling you, this is it. We have reached the treasure. Now we must learn to truly absorb what it means to see a civilization thrive by its attempt at modern efficiency. I found it very unique. Certain shamanic civilizations, they put the oldest person with the youngest person. And some people ask why, and they would say very intensely, like, because one of them has stepped out of the spirit world and one of them is entering the spirit world. a sensitivity to the presence of another dimension, in other words. I've said this before, but honesty opens is the secret to the opening of all doors. Literally, you will gain from life karmically way more if you honor the fact that you have one life to be what you are. And once the mind is stable, then you become a pilot of your consciousness. Whatever synchronistic relationship, whatever story is going on in the background of the world, it kind of comes to a stillness. I'm not joking, like it comes to a stillness. And when you're purely still and silent, intuitively kind of centered, what happens is you kind of become a watcher. Um, it's like you watch life from God's shoulders, from a collective unknown view. And based on the unknown aspect, it's like literally how you look at something and you're like, yo, man, this is so real, right? So imagine you will have that, you will see the unknown and you'll be like, yo, man, this is so real. Like, do you see what I mean? There is expansion. I mean, like, if I ask you what is the purpose of life, because we say continuity means we are indirectly worshiping infinity. We feel there's like we have a word called extinction. Simply that word gives purpose. However, it gives purpose to an infinite endeavor. And so, to be honest, reproduction and the continuity of our species, on some level, it's like somebody could say, who cares what happens on a rock in the middle of space? But somebody could say that this rock in the middle of the space harbors the most up to date intelligence so far. And there's so much of human intelligence unexplored, and due to the dawn of this technological era that's kind of coming form, this technological paradigm, it's as if our attention is going to go on our creations more than on how we are creating the moment. So my kind of intention with these talks is to aim to strengthen the position that the unknown is here first. Anyways, guys, I'm trying to think what else I could say about this before I end off. So certain moments of my life, I have had access to various consciousness streams. I've had experiences of my life where I've been the whole moment rather than just in the moment, and I've just been had moments where I've just been in the moment. I've kind of like gotten on my like put my palms on the ground and wondered, really, am I an animal? And I realized evolution is not a lie. But at the same time, we have to wonder about the origin of the subjective evolution and the free will. And that's where it's a bit dark, too dark to see yet. And so the next explorers and philosophers of the future have a lot of work to do, you know. And believe it or not, so do the poets, because poetry was a way to integrate, was a bridge between society and, in some sense, the world beyond it. It was, how can I say to you, it's like the social program, political program, and the natural program, or the poet was a sort of bridge maker between these. So eventually I started writing, and I remember anytime I would suddenly be the whole moments rather than just like literally I people entertain the notion of out of body, but for me that only means two things. The only way you can be out of body is if you're your whole moment. You know, you can say if the attention, like some people, like one day I remember waking up and my attention before I woke up was at the corner of the room and I saw someone come in the room and I suddenly woke up and I realized that my attention was outside of my eyes. Right. So we can say that is sort of out of body, but I'm saying I don't even I consider to a point that any moment you're not this body, you are the whole moment. Do you see what I mean? It's as if there's only two paradigms it could be. Either you're the whole moment or you are just a part of the moment. And so sometimes when I speak, write, or even give these talks or in anything I do, it's as if I am not what's in the moment, I'm the whole moment happening. And when I say I'm the whole moment happening, is that your mind right now is not just generating the idea of you, it is also generating the value of the world. And it gets so used to generating the value of the world that eventually that becomes your subconscious. So you can say your subconscious is how your intelligence is attempting to be the world first before you're a self first. And in this attempt, which never ends, the subconscious eventually concludes. So they say, what does this psychologists say, by the age of 12, like the individuality of the child is developed? Experience. Life has unknown dimensions that must be explored by human beings. There is now a new call of action. Human beings are no longer just responsible for personal survival, but they're also responsible for the advancement of the mind of their species. That means literally in this moment, you kind of say to yourself, okay, the world is in one way right now. What if it was in another way? And that other way is in some sense strangely like a parallel dimension. Okay? So the good and the bad are parallel dimensions of the same world. Do you see? And so, in some sense, this is the kind of notion I'm saying. There's a view of the world how it is right now. We say that is the old world. And then there's a world of what the world could be. And the more we go towards what it could be, the more with the old goes. It's like we get defined by where our attention goes. That means we see every human being has fear. We see every human being has, to some degree, desire. Now we are human beings that are governed under other human beings. We rely on a social structure to truly advance as creatures. And so this social structure is being run by creatures that have fear and desire. And so, how they have handled their fear and desire will suggest how much they care for the world. How much of life is an empty story you're trying to kind of like a carrot on a stick, like a donkey to eat. Sometimes when I look at these esoteric societies, it's kind of like seeing a little kid who's put his head right in front of a mirror, like his forehead is touching a mirror, and he's trying to enter the mirror. It's like you're trying to enter a sort of imposition of your own value system. And that is the tragedy of life when thoughts live in the space where your real self should live. I've had the privilege in this life to snap certain people out of this. I remember I was in Iran in 2016, and a kind of distant relative had invited me to their cottage in a place called Chadus in Iran, like 2 hour drive from the capital. And so I remember we go there, and there was a friend, and it's kind of like this house party thing. There's bottles of vodka around and whatnot. And and so when we're there, there's this kid that comes in there, and this kid was just kind of like whole time speaking ill of himself. Do you see what I mean? He was speaking, he was reducing himself in front of people. Okay? He was constantly saying, I'm sick, guys, I'm sick, guys, just endlessly. It was as if he was trying to get attention by acting like a wounded puppy, you know, like a wounded animal. It's like people care for a wounded animal, but they don't care that much, you know. you know And so it was one of those things where, of course, these relatives of mine, they were to some degree spiritually oriented. In Iran, there's a concept called darvish, right? And of course, anybody who knows me knows that I entertain the notions of the unknown. And so, anyways, this kid, we're all there and smoking something called which is kind of just smoking water pipe thing that's kind of like traditional to have. So we pretty much drank vodka and smoked this water pipe. And uh, I remember when we were there, it's like we were having a discussion, and I asked the guy, "Can I ask you why you're repeating endlessly that you're sick?" And I eventually realized it was a disassociation of value. Sometimes you have an incredible intelligence, but because you're valuing the world in a weird way, that intelligence isn't accessible. That opportunity isn't accessible, you know? So it's like you're living an outer life and an inner life, and sometimes the inner life can move ahead of the outer life. And that's when the future causes you suffering. Sometimes this inner life can move behind the kind of current moment. And in some sense, it becomes one of those things where the past causes you suffering. The segmentation of the values of the world will cause you suffering because you have kind of structured life in a way, and your mind's like, why isn't the universe listening to what I want? There's this story. This guy's trying to find a river. He's trying to find a bridge across this river, and he's running. He's running, like panicking, like I gotta get to the other side of this bridge, this river. I gotta find a bridge. And he's running, and he doesn't find a bridge, but he sees there's this giant rock, and this old man has sat on this giant rock, and he's meditating like a Zen practitioner, this sage. And he's on the sage is on the other side of the river, and he shouts at the sage, and he's like, "Sage!" And the sage is so old and like meditative that he literally like curtains moves his eyebrows and looks at the guy, and he's like, "What?" Yeah. And the guy's like, "Old man, wise old man, how do I get to the other side?" And the wise old man closes his eyes, deeply breathes as if he's listening to the wisdom of the world, and he looks at this guy and he says, "You are on the other side, young man." And that's the end of the story, guys. What he means is like the dude's like, how do I get to like heaven? How do I get to the other side? And the Zen master's like, you are on the other side. So from the viewpoint of the divine, there's nothing wrong with man. From the viewpoint of man, in some sense, there's something wrong with the divine. And so it is literally how the attention is being utilized. I feel that it's kind of like follows this mindset that anything a person creates, that creative phenomena is imbued with the design that brought forth its design. And this doesn't mean that there's an unknown other. This doesn't even mean there's other dimensions. What it implies is that the mind appears multidimensional, regardless of whether we acknowledge a multidimensionality or not. Because I've had moments where I've had dreams where in the dreams I could consciously, like I wanted to run left, I could. I wanted to run right, I could. And I was running really fast in the dream, right? So there was a sort of conscious free will as to a sort of subjective body. But then when I woke up, I got shocked because it was as if in that moment where I was in that dream, It's as if I didn't need to have a body. My mind had a body in that dream. You see, for my free will to move through. And so what I'm trying to say is that a lot of life is the simulation of the mind upon the body, but the mind and the body are not separate things. Kind of like your hand and your feet are part of the same intelligence. So similarly, if we move, it's as if it's kind of like we start from the singular, we go to the dualistic, then we go to the endless multidimensional, then we go into the void, and after we've gone into the void, then the greatest challenge of the void is to remember the singular. So what that means is this incarnation cycle is through various dimensions of intelligence and based on how they're segmented. Because you have, regardless of if you think you're eternal, you're temporary, you have to eat, you have to drink, and you have to sleep. And then in the morning, the world has appeared anew. What shall you do? And I say to people, have this thing called the great work. The great work is a suggestion that in your lifetime, only you can see your eyes. And so, if you care for your civilization, you will contribute from your innerity. The vision that human beings are just a random hallucination of electrons. There's something here. And this thing that's here, it is multidimensional externally at least. Internally, there is multidimensionality. You can kind of see the multidimensional self. Like right now, I'm awake, so I guess like where there's branches of knowledge, all these branches of knowledge come to the same visible trunk. So eventually, it's kind of like saying all dimensions have a singular point. And then when it comes from the trunk, you suddenly don't know if the singular point has another dimension connected to the end of it. So what it means is you see the roots of the tree are in the soil. So in the limitations of a singular dimension, there doesn't mean there isn't the possibility of greater dimensions. It's as if the roots of the tree exist. We don't see it. It's as if a tree is kind of like how this phenomena exists between two dimensions, that beneath the surface and that above. It has stretched in its intelligence in both realms. And of course, there are certain geometrical, symmetrical qualities when it comes to how revelatory intelligence works. Fundamentally, what it is you trust the moment, and as you trust the moment, you trust the phenomena. As the phenomena arises, it's kind of like baking a cake. After the person has written down or drawn something within that unknown moment of inspiration, then you kind of look at it again. You can write down any sentence, and in the next couple of years, you can read it, and it'll be deep to you. So a lot of what is depth has to do with what is remembered and what is forgotten and the duration in between. So this great work is your greatest attempt to see the treasures that you can reveal from your mind and share with your civilization, which is, to be honest, your greater self. That's it. Tell me what greater game we can play aside from seeing. And what greatness implies is that there's a sort of value, potential value, still real. And that potential value must be cherished, protected, and advanced. It's as if you, in a world of lies, you protect the last truth, which is human nature. And you become playful eventually. I say that that's the only way, one of the easiest way to step out of the linguistic simulation, from the language realms. You become playful. You see that it doesn't matter if you call this like object in front of you a cup, or you call it like the fountain of joy, like like you know what I mean? Like the subjectivity, you're playful because of the nature of its instantaneous change. Study the secrets of your attention. There's no greater secret. Thanks for tuning in, guys.